begin our work. I'd like to begin our work session for Tuesday, October 19th, 2021. Topic is water, sanitary, and storm operation rates. Keith, do you want to lead in with anything, or right straight to Craig?
Yeah, I think Craig's got this ready to go. I know we have our consultant here as well. So Craig, I'll let you pop on and begin the conversation.
Sounds good, Keith. Mayor and Council, this is we do this about every 2 to 3 years. We go through and look at our water, and what we didn't bring tonight is the sanitary and storm rates, because I didn't want to put too much of the stuff on your plate in 45 minutes and focus more on the water and the water capital side. So before Deb's going to do the presentation, and a couple things I want you to be aware of in this presentation. The commercial rates did not get raised in July this last year of the 2% or anything. We recommended a 2%, but it didn't, because it didn't pertain to the charter 2% finance. They did not raise the rates on the commercial side. So that's one thing to say.
How the hell did we miss that? No offense.
Well, I can't answer that. I would.
No, we F that up. Folks.
But I wanted you guys to know, so that's going to be brought up tonight. We also, this 10-year plan has a lot of capital up front because of the treatment plant expansion that we've been talking about for the last few years. We've been planning for that, as well as this also has, and it has not been decided, you guys haven't been decided how they're going to spend the money on the URA loan, but it does have $2 million that's in this plan for Tonkin employment area for the water system out there that's not either being development driven. So that's in there. And if you end up, Deb will talk a little bit more about it, but if we don't have the 2 million, that's what will happen in about 2030 to the water rates. So I'll let Deb talk, but I just wanted to give you a heads up. That's what you also have a public works facility, some funding in this plan for a future public works facility that would be paid for from water, which isn't all of how you pay for a public works facility. So I will let Deb take it over from here.
Okay. First of all, what are you seeing on the screen? Is it just the title page, or is it the next slide also?
You see in the water system rates and SDC update page. Deb.
Okay, just the cover page?
Just the cover.
Okay, good. I've got 2 screens, so great. All right, well, good evening, everybody. Just wanted to here's for council to talk about water rates. As we do these updates, generally triggered by some additional capital planning, and in this case, as was in the prior rate study where we had a capital improvement plan based on the 2015 master plan work, we now have the benefit of the improvements identified in the seismic resiliency plan and additional planning refinement to costs associated with the Willamette River Water Treatment Plant and Supply and the Willamette Governance Group. Rates are reviewed typically every couple of years. This time we're also looking at the SDCs, the Systems Development Charges. I'll talk separately about that. And as the practice has been, as was noted, to generally apply the rate increases across the board to all of the rates. However, the commercial rates were not increased as of July 1 for the fiscal year 2022. Some policy changes have been made over the years with respect to how you charge city and school irrigation accounts, public sorts of agencies. The rates that were the increases that we've assumed in this update to the plan apply to all accounts that are currently being charged, with some differences between commercial and residential. At the heart of the analysis is projections, cash flow projections, both revenues for the system and expenses. As an enterprise fund, the system expenses and requirements are funded primarily by water service charges, with some systems development charges applicable to capital costs only. There's some miscellaneous fees for specific services, and fortunately, the city has done an excellent job of carrying over reserves that can be applied to capital improvements during this period. On the operating side, personnel, materials and services, your share of the Willamette River water treatment plant costs are projected, as well as you have existing debt service. We haven't assumed any new debt during the planning period, but so it's all cash funding, but there is existing debt through the end of the planning period. And we'll talk about how this assumption of cash funding, what impact that has on your future capital reserves. We, again, as an enterprise fund, it's really important that we, as accurately as possible, forecast water sales so that we can forecast water sales revenue. And so we look at trends in customer account growth as well as usage trends, which has been interesting the last couple of years. There have been some increases in single family water use per account the last couple of years that relate to people being at home more due to COVID protocols and hot, dry weather conditions. That has been offset in part, though, by reductions in commercial and irrigation use per account. Irrigation is primarily multifamily and institutional, schools and other things. The assumptions, we try to balance. We don't want to be too conservative. We don't want to with our projections, but we also don't want to assume that customer growth or water sales are going to grow more than they have in the past, because we don't want to overstate the revenue and have you come up short. As you'll see, things get a little tight in the out years, so it's important that you continue to keep an eye on this closely and monitor the plan every couple of years as you've been doing. So we try to normalize for unexpected conditions like pandemic and weather by looking at using average usage trends over the past few years. And we're assuming continued modest customer growth of 0.5% to 1%, depending on the customer class. Systems development charges, as you probably know, are highly variable because they're driven by growth. You have seen some fairly robust revenue from systems development charges in the range of $300,000 to $600,000 over the past few years. The forecast assumes $400,000 going forward, so in the middle of that range. On the expense side, we take the budget and we apply escalation factors. These factors are for capital and materials and services are higher than what we used in the past plan, reflecting increased costs, certainly construction costs, and just general inflation. Then interest earnings, continued franchise fee payments. Water purchases are obviously a big line item in the budget for the water system. And you have generally gotten a payment back from the city of Wilsonville at the end of the year because your portion of the costs have tended to be lower than what the rates that are forecast at the beginning of the year. That's in part because the usage assumptions are fairly conservative. And so usage has, for both cities, has exceeded the projections in the past. And when that usage increases, the costs don't also increase at that same rate because most of the costs are fixed for any given year. So it drives the unit cost down. And the city of Sherwood has received a payment back for the past few years. So there's some added contingency in that we're forecasting based on the budgeted numbers, which tend to be higher than what you have paid. But again, just to balance the risk, it's good to assume that same level, and the city of Wilsonville, it's based on their numbers as well. The big dollars come in the capital improvement funding. And this table shows you in the 5-year, the 2 5-year increments, we're looking at a 10-year period. As Craig mentioned, it's front loaded. So the bottom half of the table are the capital improvement costs. And you can see about 31 million over the 10-year period, 21 million in the first 5 years. And just to point out this third line under capital funding sources, as I said, no new debt is assumed. One of your existing debt bonds is paid off just after this period that we're looking at, early 2030s. So you've got 2 outstanding debt issues. And so if we can cash fund during this period, and then you've got probably another looking at another large expansion at the plant just early 2030s, and perhaps then you will need to issue additional debt. But this plan is all about cash funding, both from existing capital fund balances, which you can see are about $8 million in the capital fund, and we'll talk about operating in a minute. Some SDC revenue, as I said, $400,000 a year. Operating transfers, which is basically transferring annual rate revenue and reserves in the water fund over to the capital fund to pay for these improvements. I should note there's also $2 million assumed from urban renewal funding, and that first 5 years for targeted improvements, as Craig mentioned. This shows you the graphically the pattern of capital expenditures that are planned, and right off the bat here in 2023, you have a large cost that's assumed for plant Willamette River water treatment plant upgrades and expansion. This number is still being refined, I understand, and we hope that it will come down slightly, and that will then bring up this green line, which is the capital fund balance, which you can see takes a significant hit in the first year there because those reserves that you've been carrying over are needed to partially fund those improvements. You've got some other large improvements in transmission and distribution in about 2025. Then there's a new public works facility of which water would pay a share, and that's towards the end of the plan. So the reserves really help enable you to not issue new debt and to stay generally within the rate increases that we've projected previously. So this shows the rate revenue forecast in the blue. This assumes 2% residential per year and increasing the commercial to 3%. I'm sorry, I see that there's a hand up. Yeah.
Tim, maybe you're going to ask the question I'm going to ask, so go ahead.
Well, maybe just a comment, and you can confirm or deny my assumption. But the big expenditure for the plant, I mean, we've been planning that for years, and that's why we've been building up those reserves. So I was expecting to see that dip, just as your chart shows, and it's not necessarily a negative for me. It's just we need to be planning for the next one. Is that a correct assumption?
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah. And I would just add for anyone listening, this is why Sherwood does such a great job at this. We planned for these things decades out. Craig, your team has done a wonderful job. And this is why we don't have to go begging to the state for money, because we haven't planned like other cities in our great state of Oregon have had to do recently. So kudos to the team for that.
And my comment is, we should never assume that we shouldn't take out debt to finance if that means having a larger reserve that's liquid in case we deem that to be important.
That's a really good point considering the cost of money right now.
Right.
And we could certainly run that option and bring that back to council. This next graph shows the water fund. So this is where the operating expenses and the transfers over, excuse me, to pay for capital. So this chart, the different colors represent the blue is the O&M and the red is the existing debt service, which you can see drops off here after 2030, starts to be reduced. Capital transfers in green. And so like the reserve line in the capital fund, the operating fund reserves also decline because we have to transfer over, supplement the reserves in the capital fund with payments from the operating fund to meet those significant capital costs. So those take a pretty significant dip in the first 5 years and then kind of flatten out, and then are expected in the later years to take another dip as those costs continue to increase in the transfers. So this shows you the combined reserves, the blue being the operating and the red being the capital. So it just pulls those together. And we have put kind of a range of what we generally accepted using, standard assumptions about what are typical contingencies. And so for the lower range, 6 months of operating costs plus a year of debt service. And the upper range is 12 months operating plus 1 year debt service. This, you wouldn't ideally drop below the low end of the range. That is what is your emergency reserve. And make sure that you can pay debt service in the following year if you were to come up short on revenues or have some large expense that wasn't anticipated. This does not set you up for major future capital reserves, but it does maintain a decent operating contingency. But you see that that we do get very close to the low end of the range, even with the 3% increase for commercial. And again, there is a large plant expansion that's on the horizon just beyond this period somewhere. And so clearly, with combined reserves dropping below or to about 4 million or below, you will need to issue debt at some point in the future. If we assume 2% across the board, you can see that the combined reserves do drop below that low end of the range. That would be a loss over time of about $1 million. So that's the rates. We also look at the systems development charges to make sure that growth is continuing to pay its share of the capital improvement.
So wait. So with rates, what are you going to change and come back for a second conversation with?
Well, I think
We're
that
not giving any direction today after a 20-minute look, but at rates. So
yeah, I'll let Craig jump in.
So Mayor, I think the next step is for David to bring this to the Finance Committee to have the conversation with you guys as part of that Finance Committee leading up to the budget, so everybody sees what's going on before we move forward. If you guys don't want that, be more than happy to come back the 1st of December and have a different conversation about that. But that's kind of where I was when we talked internally. I think it'd be good to get it in front of the finance committee, which you guys are part of, but to see all this stuff for the rates. We are going to be bringing back the sanitary and storm rate conversation, the first meeting in December. So then you're going to have everything in the utilities besides the street maintenance fees and that kind of stuff in front of you.
All right. Well, I expect we'll all get this presentation when we're done sent to council, and so that they can review it. And then I suspect that we'll have another conversation in November or December. And we might,
did you not get,
people might
did you not
ask
get it,
you,
Mayor?
what?
Did you not get the presentation?
No, not that I.
Okay.
No.
All right.
To look at other scenarios. So, okay, moving on to SDCs.
I was just thinking the finance committee, and I apologize that you did not get the presentation because it was sent out. So
Right. So it's not going to be, I'm not going to delay conversations about these things in the throes of 3 budget committee meetings. We can bring the finance committee together with city council potentially before the end of the year or in advance of, separate from the budget process, but not.
I think that's what we talked about internally when I talked to David. So within the next month or so.
SDCs.
Okay. So for the SDCs, since the last update, we've added the resiliency projects. These are partially related to growth and partially related to improving the level of performance of facilities for existing development. And we've also updated costs where projects have been completed, fine-tuned the numbers to reflect developer funding for some of the growth areas where developers have put in lines that serve their development specifically. There may be future adjustments to reflect the Willamette River water treatment plant costs as those get refined. These are based on the same numbers in the CIP that the rates are based on. So you can see that the increase in the total SDC for the smallest meter size of a typical single family customer would be about 10%, go to just over $7,000 for the 5/8 by 3/4 inch meter.
So how much of a new public works facility is eligible to be built by SDCs?
So for facilities, excuse me, facilities like that, we do a proportionate share based on population or water use. So it's I think over based on the build out scenario that we use for those sorts of large system-wide facilities is about 50% of the water share. And the other systems would be, those costs would be incorporated presumably in the SDCs of sanitary and storm and transportation.
So that's not in there yet.
It's in these numbers, in the water numbers, but we're just presenting the water share tonight.
All right, I have doubts that it's accurate, but we'll circle back.
Okay. We did pull together a comparison of both the rates and the SDCs. This shows typical water bill for a customer consuming 800 cubic feet of water per month. And you can see that Sherwood is within kind of this middle pack of very similar to Newburgh, Beaverton, and Hillsborough's upper system. Tigard in Portland, significantly higher, and on the lower end, Wilsonville, Hillsborough, Tualatin. All of these, Tigard, Portland, Hillsborough, and Newburgh are all projecting higher than 2% increases in the future. For the SDCs, you're lower in this comparison relative to the middle. And this just shows you the current and the updated. It wouldn't change your position in this comparison here. Just a couple of notes about financial resiliency, a concern of all communities on utility rates these days.
Can I ask a quick question before you move on?
Sure.
Are the SDCs by the water meter size? Is that how they're calculated?
Yes.
So
Correct.
I'm assuming that's a proxy for assumptions of how much water they're going to be using.
That's absolutely correct. That
So
the water meter capacity, you're basically reserving that capacity.
So the reason I asked that question, and I don't know if this is going to happen in Oregon or not, but I've heard rumors of it. But in like Washington State, where I've done some buildings, they're now requiring sprinkler systems in the building, which require, for the event of a fire, higher volumes. So is those kind of changes come on the books? Is that still going to be an accurate proxy for a meter size?
It would be modified, Tim. We tried. It's in the books that a city cannot require a home to be sprinkled, a single family detached home to be sprinkled.
I'm thinking more for like duplexes and triplexes and stuff like that. That's where I'd run into it. So that's just the only reason. I'm just bringing it up as a caution as we move forward.
Yeah.
With respect to financial resiliency, and again, pointing back to the city's practice in this regard, that consistent annual adjustments help to minimize rate spikes. You've been increasing rates even within your limitation, but you have consistently been increasing rates with the exception of the commercial charges in 2022. 30 to 40% of the revenue generally should come from fixed charges, so not be subject to changes in water consumption. You're on the lower end of this right now, but you are within this range of receiving about 30% of your revenue from the fixed charges. Again, utility systems are a high percentage of the costs are fixed when we consider a short-term planning period. Over time, obviously, as consumption decreases, then you can delay expansion and things like that. But in the short term, very few of the costs are variable. And then, as we've talked about, the reserves, your existing reserves, give you the ability to smooth out the lumpiness of the capital improvement plan and also provide for emergencies. And certainly the significant reserves that you have in the bank today are a great asset in meeting the increases in the CIP during this period. Looking to the future and in terms of what kind of the balances on what's going to put upward pressure versus downward pressure on the rates, steady consumption and customer growth have helped because that has increased revenue from water sales. The refinancing, helping to save on the existing debt service costs, leveraging those reserves and developer funding. The city's done a great job of that as well. And on the flip side is the significant capital investment that's needed during this planning period, which we've known about for a long time, but it is here. And the fact that you do have two existing outstanding debt through 2031, and there's a little catch up because of that no rate increase on the commercial side for 2022. With that, happy to answer additional questions.
Questions?
So Mayor, Council, just one other thing that I forgot to mention at the beginning. Deb was talking about the treatment plant and those costs might be coming down some. We're obligated for like 9.5 is what we signed an IGA with them. Some of the costs are coming in a little bit lower now, but we're only at 60% drawings, but it would be nice in the end if we actually were down a couple $1 million from that. So, when we get to 90%, I feel pretty good at telling you the number, what that is, but right now stuff's changing. So, but just keep that in the back pocket as we move forward, that could be an option, but I wouldn't, with prices and everything, it could be going up too. So once we get to 90%, we'll know more on that. And we do have a schedule for the treatment plan, and we're right on in what Deb's got here for the 2023. It's looking like it's going to be a 2-year project. So she's, as far as the funding or spending goes, that's probably pretty close to what it's going to look like.
So I'm going to look at the option of borrowing funds while they're cheap instead of drawing down reserves, and what that looks like versus and building up reserves greater for when we need to, do other big expenditures. I don't want to borrow money and with potential in 8 years when rates are going to not be 3%. I mean,
Not to mention with inflation going up, that could work in our favor.
So would you guys want us to bring back, when we come back next time, would you want us to bring back a plan of what that would look like?
yeah, I mean, I'm going to want to offline dig into this report and the numbers, the assumptions, and clearly a 3% number on commercial might not be the right number either. Assumption.
Okay.
So because those numbers got the reserves in that plan is not sufficient, is not wise from that very brief look in my first impression.
Okay.
And then on the SDCs, I want to know. I want to see what the assumptions are in that. It looks small.
Okay. So that actually something else different in this plan that wasn't in the plans before is the resiliency projects are included in this and what we can actually spend SDC wise. So that's something that's changed over the last 3 years since we've done this. So those costs are included in here too. It's a 50-year plan, but there's some upfront costs that are loaded in that plan as well. So just bring you up to speed on that.
Yeah.
So
from my side, I need a lot more info.
Okay.
And consider options. I mean, just seems like it would make a lot of sense to at least consider what borrowing now would do to it versus borrowing when we know it's going to be more expensive.
Okay. Any other questions?
Nope.
Cool. Thanks, Craig.
You bet.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you. And thank you, Deb.
Yes, thanks, Deb. Appreciate it.
And so,
You're welcome.
Craig, when are you thinking of you're going to come back with Sewerage Storm?
Yeah, so I have it on the agenda forecast to bring. We didn't want to bring it all in one night because I figured there'd be some conversation about the water and the SDCs. So I think we're set to bring back the storm and sanitary rates on the first meeting in December. I think it's on the agenda forecast. I don't have it in front of me, but we could also, if there's a light agenda that night, we could probably have another discussion on this too, if you're wanting. I'm sure that gives Deb some time and work together on that.
Awesome.
Okay.
Any other questions for Craig? Awesome. That's all we have for our work session. So we'll have a little bit of a longer break before we start the city council meeting.